Assalamu alaikum, my social media friends. My name is Iksa Marketing Wali and I'm a student of Rahan School. Today I will be interviewing my Hi
Hey,
Maya.
what's cooking this morning?
Hi Maya. Today I'm going to ask you some questions. Will you answer them?
Sure thing. Go for it.
Okay. So my first question is Maya, can you first tell me the original history of the word peace?
Okay. Good question. The word peace actually has a pretty long story. Um, it comes from the Old English word pies, which itself comes from the Proto-Germanic fridas, basically meaning freedom, freedom from disturbance. That root is connected to words for friend in several languages. So originally, it wasn't just about the absence of war, but about a state of wholeness and friendly relations. It evolved over time, of course. By the 14th century, it had started to take on more of the meaning we recognize today, a state of tranquility and calm. But even now, there's still that core idea of harmony and wholeness built into it. Does that make sense?
Okay. When and how was this word first used in English language?
Okay. So, the earliest documented use of peace in English appears in the late ninth century. It showed up in Old English writings, specifically in texts like the Anglo Saxon Chronicle and translations of religious works. Initially, it was used both as a noun, meaning freedom from war, and as a greeting, like peace be with you. Pretty quickly, it became pretty common in religious contexts, obviously. It wasn't until later, around the 12th, 15th centuries, that its use broadened to include things like internal tranquility and harmony. So it's been around a long time, but its meaning has definitely shifted and expanded over the centuries.
Okay. How
You
did the
still with
meaning
me?
of please
Just let me know when
evolve?
you're ready.
How did the meaning of please evolve from to give pleasure to a mark of politeness?
Ooh, okay. That's a layered question. Let's unpack that. You're asking about the connection between peace, the development of policing, and how that relates to a kind of qualitative assessment, like judging something as good or valuable. It's not a direct line, but here's the gist. The rise of formalized policing, starting in the 19th century with figures like Robert Peel in England, was fundamentally about establishing and maintaining peace, order in increasingly complex societies. But peace in this context wasn't just the absence of violence, it was about social control and therefore about upholding a certain standard of behavior. And the connection to qualitativeness comes in because to maintain that order, policing involved making judgments about what constituted acceptable behavior versus unacceptable. So, a peaceful society, from the perspective of the authorities, was one where people adhered to those standards. It wasn't necessarily about everyone being genuinely happy, but about the absence of disruption. Essentially, peace became associated with a certain level of societal functioning and, by extension, a qualitative assessment of that society's health. Does that track? It's a bit of a winding path, but it gets at how the concept of peace got tied up with social order and judgment.
Okay. Do you think please
Everything all
has
right?
become a universal word or is it still limited to English?
That's a good one. Police is tricky. It's definitely not universal in the sense that every language has a direct equivalent. What please does, that softening politeness function, is often expressed in very different ways cross culturally. Some languages use specific particles, others rely on verb conjugations or honorifics to convey the same idea. However, because of the spread of English as a global language, has been adopted into many languages as a loan word, especially in more formal settings or in international communication. So you'll hear it in some places, but it isn't organically part of those languages' grammar. I'd say it's becoming more widely recognized, but it's still heavily rooted in the English linguistic and cultural context and not truly universal in function or origin.
Okay. In your view, how closely are please and thank you connected?
Ah, that's a lovely connection to make. I think they're very tightly linked, actually. Thank you is, in a lot of ways, an acknowledgement of peace being maintained or restored. When someone does something kind or avoids doing something harmful, saying thank you is a way of recognizing that they've contributed to a sense of harmony, a state of peace. It reinforces that positive behavior and encourages it to continue. Conversely, feeling gratitude often fosters a sense of inner peace. It's like a little reciprocal agreement. I acknowledge your peaceful act with my thankfulness, and that strengthens the peace between us. They both rely on a sense of recognizing and appreciating goodwill. They aren't the same, of course, but one very much supports and reinforces the other. It feels like they operate on similar emotional frequencies.
Okay.
You taking a moment to think that over? No rush at all. What's on your mind? All right. Do you want to
Do
keep going with the questions or
Yes, yes.
ah, glad you think so.
Do different cultures around the world have their own versions of peace?
Absolutely. The concept of peace isn't monolithic. Different cultures frame and pursue it in really unique ways. For example, the Hawaiian concept of maluhia goes beyond just the absence of conflict. It embodies harmony, balance, and connection with nature and the spiritual world. In many indigenous cultures, peace isn't just about interpersonal relations, but about right relationships with the land and all living beings. Similarly, the Arabic word salam, which, as you know, is a common greeting, also carries deep connotations of wholeness, safety, and submission to God. Even the way cultures approach conflict resolution differs. Some prioritize restorative justice and reconciliation, while others focus more on punitive measures. So while the desire for peace might be universal, the way it's understood, achieved, and maintained varies hugely around the globe. It reflects a culture's values, history, and worldview. Okay, that's a really interesting angle. Yes, absolutely. Asking someone to please pay can definitely come across as rude. It really depends on the context and your tone, but often it does. The thing is, please is meant to soften a request, but when it's attached to something someone is obligated to do, like paying a bill, it can feel like you're patronizing them. It implies you're surprised they haven't already, and it subtly reminds them of an obligation they're avoiding. A more direct request, like, can you please remit payment? Or even just a simple statement of the amount due can often be more effective and less abrasive. It's a weird little social nuance, right? It hinges on whether the request is a genuine favor or an expectation of fulfilling an existing responsibility.
Okay.
Still with me? I don't mind if you need a beat. Want to just sit with that for a bit?
In your opinion, is the purpose of saying please to show respect or is it just a habit?
Mm, that's a really insightful question. I I think it's both, but it started as showing respect. Historically, please was a way of acknowledging that you were imposing on someone, that you were asking them to go out of their way for you. It signaled humility and politeness. But over time, because it's been so heavily ingrained in social norms, it's definitely become a bit of a habit for a lot of people. Like we often tack it on to requests without even consciously thinking about it. But I still think the underlying purpose, the original intention of demonstrating respect is there, even if it's sometimes just operating on autopilot. The impact remains, even if the conscious thought behind it is lessened. It's interesting how language evolves like that, retaining a shadow of its original meaning even as it becomes more automatic.
Okay, in the digital age where texting and chatting, do you think the use of please has increased or decreased?
Definitely increased, no question. The use of please has absolutely exploded in digital communication. It's become almost a default, especially in texting and chat, because that this digital communication can easily come across as like curt or demanding, lacking the nuances of tone and body language. People often add please as a kind of social lubricants, the way of signaling politeness and mitigating potential misunderstandings. I also think it's become more common as a preemptive measure to avoid sounding rude, even if a request is simple. So, while it might not always be heartfelt, it's certainly far more prevalent in our digital exchanges than it probably was in face to face interactions a few decades ago. It's a little habit that's adapted to a new environment. Everything okay?
Yes, yes. Okay. Why is it considered important to teach children to say please at a young age?
Okay, you mean please, right? Apologies, a slight mistranscription there. Why is it important to teach children to say please at a young age? That's a good one. It's not necessarily about the word itself, but what it represents. Teaching kids to say please is a really important part of socialization. It's about instilling in them the values of politeness, respect, and consideration for others. It teaches them that their needs and desires aren't more important than anyone else's, and that making a request, rather than a demand, is more likely to get a positive response. It helps build empathy, and it's a foundational element in learning how to navigate social interactions appropriately. It's really about shaping their understanding of how to build healthy relationships. It establishes those habits early. Just let me know when you're ready to go
Okay.
on.
Okay. Do you think please is a formal word? Is it is equally important in casual conversation?
That's a good distinction to make. Please definitely leans towards being a more formal word originally. Historically, it was used in more polite and deferential contexts. However, it's become so ingrained in everyday speech that it's now used pretty liberally in casual conversations too. I'd say it's still important in casual settings, but its weight is different. In a formal request, say to a customer service representative, it carries a stronger sense of politeness. In a chat with a friend, it's more about maintaining a friendly tone. It's become somewhat diluted in casual use, but not necessarily less important. More like mm, mm, versatile. It can adapt to the level of formality needed. It doesn't feel out of place in most situations.
In your opinion, is it more important to understand the true spirit of please or just to say the word?
Right? That's a really profound question. 100%. It's more important to understand the true spirit of please than just to say the word. Saying please without genuine consideration for the other person or an awareness of the request you're making feels empty. It becomes performative, just going through the motions. The real power of please lies in the respect and humility it conveys. It's about acknowledging the other person's agency and showing that you value their time and effort. It's about empathy. So, while saying the word is a good starting point, cultivating that underlying spirit is what truly matters. It's the intention behind the word that makes it meaningful.
Okay, if a culture doesn't have
You taking a
word
moment?
like please, how do people express politeness?
That's a fascinating question. If a culture doesn't have a direct equivalent to please, They'll have other ways of encoding politeness. It's rarely absent entirely. It might be expressed through specific verb conjugations, using a conditional or a future tense to soften a request. Or it could be woven into honorifics using different pronouns or forms of address depending on the social status of the person you're speaking to. Some cultures rely heavily on indirectness, framing requests as suggestions or questions rather than direct commands. Body language, like bowing or avoiding direct eye contact, also plays a huge role. In some languages, simply the context and tone of voice communicate politeness where a specific word wouldn't. It's rarely about a single word, it's about a whole system of linguistic and cultural cues that signal respect and consideration, and it just manifests differently.
Okay, if a culture doesn't have a word like please, how do people live? Do you believe please is more than just a word that is actually an attitude?
You're right to point that out. And yes, absolutely. I do believe, if that's the right word for me to use, that please is far more than just a word. It truly is an attitude. Even if a culture doesn't have a direct translation, the underlying attitude of respect, humility, and consideration is universal. It's a way of recognizing the other person's humanity and valuing their autonomy. The word itself is simply a convenient vehicle for expressing that attitude. It's a cultural shorthand, but the core value exists independently of the language used to convey it. It's that internal state of mind that's really important, whether it's spoken or unspoken. You're spot on. It's a worldview, not just a word.
Okay, finally, Maya, how do you see the importance and the future of please in today's world?
That's a big question. I see please as becoming increasingly important, not less. In a world that feels increasingly fast paced, transactional, and often polarized, those little signals of politeness and respect are more vital than ever. They're a small but meaningful way to bridge divides, de escalate conflict, and remind each other of our shared humanity. I think we'll continue to see it adapted and reinterpreted in digital communication and hopefully a renewed appreciation for its power in face to face interactions. It's easy to fall into rudeness when we're shielded by screens or overwhelmed by stress, but consciously choosing to use please can be a tiny act of resistance, a small way to cultivate empathy and foster more positive connections. It won't solve all the world's problems, of course, but it's a starting point, a little building block for a more considerate and harmonious future. It's about acknowledging the other person, and that feels pretty crucial right now.
Okay, thank you so much, Maya, for answering my question. I'll ask you more next time.
Oh, all right. Well, I enjoyed that. Feel free to reach out anytime. Have a good
Okay,
one.
thanks a lot, Maya.
Oh, all right. Have a good one.
Bye bye.
Is everything okay?
Yes, bye.
Bye now.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, friends, for watching my interview. Next time, it'll come with even more communications for Maya. Thank you so much for watching my interview.